You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. We are talking with Pat Huddleston, who is a former enforcement branch chief at the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. He's the author of The Vigilant Investor, and he also founded an organization called Investors Watchdog. Pat, a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me, Doug. I'm pleased to be here.
So what is the Investors Watchdog?
Well, Investors Watchdog is the company that aims to make sure that people don't lose their money to investment fraud in the first instance. I'm a lawyer by training, and I've had to represent a lot of folks who've lost everything they worked and saved for. Some of these people 60, 70, 80 years old, and too often there's just no getting it back once you lose it. And so we feel convicted to try to stop that from happening in the first instance.
Okay, so that's called Investors Watchdog. Now, in recent years, the media has been full of lots and lots of stories, such as Bernard Madoff and the fall of huge banks like Lehman Brothers. These are the big stories. A lot of us don't know. Well, I guess I do in my business my day job is of a financial advisor, so I have met people who've been hurt by this. But a lot of people don't know anyone who've been hurt by this, and they just see it in the news. These are the big stories. On the more common level, are there investment scams that the ordinary investor really has to watch out for?
Well, they're all over the place, Doug. I would bet that every one of your listeners wouldn't have to dig too far to find somebody they know who's fallen for one of these things. And, they may not hear about it, but that's because oftentimes the victims of these things live in misplaced guilt and shame, and they're just very embarrassed. They don't want to talk about them. But yeah, there are so many that I write a blog post on a new scam, just usually here in the States, every single weekday. And usually I have to sort from among 4 or 5 to decide which one I'm going to write on. There are more of them popping up every day than I can possibly write about. And it's even worse now than it's ever been because, as you probably talk to your listeners about over here, we get 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every single day, moving their 401k accounts into self-directed accounts. And it's just there's never been a better time to be in the fraud game, unfortunately.
So don't people recognize that when something is sounds too good to be true, that it probably is?
Well, oftentimes they do, but you'd be surprised how few of the scams are recognizable by that old adage. You can probably recognize 10, 15% of investment scams using that, very sound advice. The problem is that, the scam artists know that old adage too, and they know that you know it. And so competent scam artists would never dream of promising you something that sounds too good to be true. I blogged yesterday, I think, for a post that comes out end of the week about a scam that promised the whopping 7.5% per year. Earlier in the year, I've posted on scams that promise 5% per year. Now, that may be a big return to get guaranteed these days, but it is not so eye-popping to make you think that it must be too good to be true. The competent scam artists tend to think about these double your money guys or the friends with the Nigerian general as they're just embarrassed to be in the same community with them. Those are the guys who flunked out of scam school, the amateurs. So what we say over here is, it sounds too good to be true. You're talking to an amateur scam artist. And so people can protect themselves more by understanding that the investment that most threatens your nest egg looks exactly to your untrained eye like a legitimate investment.
Okay, so given that, how is the average guy supposed to protect himself?
It all gets down to what you look for. You must do an investigation, but what you look for in that investigation makes all the difference. Too often people look for confirmation of legitimacy, which just leads you down a wrong path, puts you in the wake of cognitive biases that are inevitably going to lead you to the wrong conclusion. So
what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, cognitive biases. I think you may have even had Daniel Kahneman on your show before.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when you said that people are looking, the cognitive bias is when they think one way, but when we spoke about, you mentioned that people end up looking at an investment the wrong way.
Oh yeah, they're looking for legitimacy. They want to believe that it's true, and so they tell themselves, "Hey, listen, I wasn't born yesterday. I'm not going to take this at face value. I'm going to get out there and seek confirmation that this thing is what it appears to be." Well, what you find in that instance is so often evidence that the scam artist wants you to find. You don't realize he has cohorts who are set up just to be in your path when you go seeking evidence of legitimacy. And so what we tell people instead is that you have to look for fraud. Now, you would think they were two sides of the same coin, but they're not. You can look for legitimacy all day long and still not avoid a fraud. But if you look for a fraud, you'll either find it or you won't. And if you've looked for it and don't find it, you can feel reasonably comfortable that the thing is at least going to try to return what they say they're going to return.
Okay. We are talking with Pat Huddleston, who formerly was an enforcement branch chief with the U.S. SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. He specializes in dealing with investor scam and finding it. So if people have to look for fraud, one of the things that I advise clients when they even ask about me, they say, "Doug, how do I know that you're for real?" is I tell them, listen, go to the FINRA website and look me up, or go to the website of the Israeli Securities Authority. If you do that, is that enough?
It's not enough. It's a great first start, and I'm very happy that you advise folks that. I think that we could probably wipe out 20 to 25% of all investment fraud losses if we could just get people to make that check to find out if the person trying to sell you something is licensed, because oftentimes they aren't. But it's not enough. You know, there are hundreds of brokers kicked out of the U.S. securities industry every year for unethical conduct. A better source for information, even than FINRA, for folks here in the States, and maybe they've got that in Israel as well, is a Central Registration Depository. We call it CRD. And over here, we get them from our state securities regulators. They give you more information than the FINRA website does. They will tell you a full employment history. They will tell you what exams people have taken, and even have just a little bit more on disciplinary history than you can get from FINRA. So we tell people to start there. But beyond that, you have to look for a history of lawsuits or bankruptcy or criminal violations. You can do that through pacer.gov, pacer.gov. It's a website that allows you to access the entire federal court system in the U.S.
And do you think that you have to do that every time you're going to go? If you walk into an office of a major brokerage firm or a big investment advisory firm, you have to go and check all that out?
If you want to keep your money, you should. Yeah, I get that question a lot, Doug. People say, "Hey, listen, I'm with fill in the name of a big brokerage firm. I don't have anything to worry about, right?" And I say, no, that's not true. It's probably wise to be with. If you have to choose between a small brokerage and a big one, maybe the big one will give you a little bit more comfort, because if they mistreat you, there will be some assets for you to collect against. Whereas if you go with a shoestring broker dealer and they mistreat you, perhaps they'll just go out of business and won't be able to pay you. But in terms of hiring ethical people, it's just very hard to know that on the front end. And so some very reputable brokerage firms wind up hiring people who aren't very ethical. They hire for sales ability, which is understandable. That's how they make money. And please understand, everybody you're dealing with. We're not talking about people who are just born crooks, sociopaths necessarily. We're talking about people who are just human. And sometimes they get into financial straits that put pressure on them to make ethical compromises that they would never make if times were good. And so what we've seen is, in the depths of the financial crisis, is brokers really hurting for commissions, grasping for commissions any way they could find them, deciding to sell alternative products that weren't approved by their broker dealer. So you just need to be aware, as impressive as your representative may be, he or she is still a human being. And so I say, yeah, go ahead and do that check, even though they may be affiliated with a well-known company.
And aren't the clients also protected by the SIPC?
Well, that provides limited protection. That does not cover you in the event of fraud losses. That is there to compensate you for the value of your securities if the brokerage firm goes out of business. But it's typically, Madoff notwithstanding, if your broker puts you into a limited partnership that turns out to be a Ponzi scheme, SIPC is not going to pay you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's really buyer beware.
That's the better approach to take, yeah. And people too often think that, hey, listen, why do I have regulators for? Well, I try to tell people you have to think of the SEC and the other regulators and the ones there in Israel, I'm sure, as law enforcement, as police officers. Now, when does the cop show up? He shows up when there's been a crime committed. He cannot possibly stop it before it happens, except by, just happening to be walking by that part of the street where you would otherwise have been mugged. They're post-violation enforcers. They're there to bring people to justice. And so I tell people you can't think that they are out there making sure that there are no fraud scams or no scam artists. They're out there, and they're there to bring those people to justice. You have to make sure that you don't fall victim to them in the first instance.
And how about by the internet? Because we all get, I'm sure, many, many offers a day about these great deals on the internet. Obviously, some of them are a little bit crazy, like the Nigerian general who wants to share the fortune that he has. But
Right.
a lot of them do seem very, very real. How can a person protect himself against that?
That's just I tell people don't invest in anything that only through the internet or through some cold call. That's the only way to keep yourself safe, because the truth is that people have technical proficiency now to put up a website that looks just absolutely first rate. It would be easy if you could say, well, that looks amateurish, that must be a fraud, and that looks very plush, it must be real. That's not the way it is. If you cannot do your due diligence investigation on it, don't invest in it. Bottom line, it's nest eggs have never been more at risk, Doug. This is, I believe, the most dangerous time for investors, certainly in my lifetime. It threatens to make us forget Bernie Madoff, believe it or not.
Oh man, that's scary. And what do you suggest to people whose parents are at an age when perhaps they are very, very, they're real targets for these scammers? How do you tell your parents in a comfortable way that they need to get a second opinion? That's
a fantastic question, and it's an urgent matter. I cover this in the book a bit, and what I say is you need to pull them into a partnership, a mutual relationship whereby they're going to look out for you and you're going to look out for them. You don't, if you want them to receive the message, you can't make them feel like children, or you can't make them feel diminished in some way. And so what you may just start the conversation and say, hey, look, mom, dad, or mom and dad, I've been reading a lot about these financial scams, and they're very clever. You can't see them. They don't seem too good to be true. And we both need to look out for each other on this. Would you mind being a sounding board for me if I'm considering something? And can I be that kind of resource for you as well? Now, if you get nothing else than the name of their financial advisor, you can still check out that financial advisor without their permission. And if you find troubling conduct, then you can take that back to mom and dad. But yeah, I encourage people, push past that feeling of discomfort you have when you think about having that conversation. Listen, nobody wants their mom or dad to think that they're greedy or
watching or just assuming that they can't handle it. I actually try that when I have older people as clients. I try to encourage them to bring in their children to the meetings. I say, listen, you got to start training the next generation. And really what I'm doing is I want to make sure that the parents have someone else to help them make the decisions.
What a good idea. Yeah, that's a terrific idea.
Pat, I'm actually very sorry. This is fascinating, but we're running out of time. We've been talking to Pat Huddleston, who's a former enforcement branch chief at the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. He's also the founder of an organization called Investors Watchdog, and he wrote a book called The Vigilant Investor. In the last few seconds, can you just tell people how can they follow you?
You can follow us on Twitter, at the Twitter handle @Scamdemic. You can take a look at the website at investorswatchdog.com. If you want to read a sample chapter of the book, you can go to thevigilantinvestor.com, or, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can take a look at a sample chapter there as well.
Okay. Pat Huddleston, thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure, Doug. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.